My best friend's dad was murdered while I was studying the Rwandan genocide. So these theories, these articles, all these faraway facts about retaliation and anger and retaliatory violence and all of these things that at the time felt so far away immediately came right home. All my friends and I went home for the funeral, and everyone sort of gathered. And it was really the first time that I wrestled with the feeling of complete devastation and the devastation that violence can bring to a community. I remember this period of my life as a really important oscillation between the personal grieving and the personal experience of violence with my work and my studying of human security and really diving deeply into what we know as a society from anthropology about the power of retaliation and the power of violence. And it was the first time that I remember really empathizing with that human instinct of retaliation and understanding the power of mistrust and what happens when trust breaks down to that level for those to have the propensity to kill. In 2014, I traveled to South Sudan. The wounds of war were very fresh. The country had just fallen back into conflict in December, so I was there about 4 months later. And I'll never forget the feeling of what it's like to be in a country that close to war. It's pretty hard to put into words just how distrustful it felt, but at every level of society, at the most micro interactions, you felt what it's like to be in a society with no trust. Whether it was taking a phone call, having a staff meeting, paying a waiter, just walking down the street. Every single person in Juba had their head on a swivel. Every single person did a double take. Every single person was watching over their shoulder. As many of you probably know in this room, and as I'm certainly not the best spokesperson for the South Sudanese experience, but South Sudan at the time had just gotten through a decade's battle of secession. The fight for secession of South Sudan had taken years and years and years, lots of bloodshed, lots of millions of dollars. And for a country who had fought so hard to finally achieve their view of liberation, to then have their political leaders turn their backs on them so quickly and start another war, that you felt it, that was the last straw, that people just didn't have the capacity to trust. And here we are years later, and South Sudan is still in a civil war. And again, you just feel that heaviness of what it means to mistrust. Over the course of my career as a humanitarian, as a peacebuilding advocate, and in US foreign policy, I've relived this experience time and time again. From Somalia to Iraq, Central African Republic to Guatemala, you see the lack of trust and the erosion of trust in each other and in institutions as the key driver of conflict, violence, and division. From a small town murder in California to high crime conflict zones like South Sudan, there's that universal lack of trust that is so shared and really is the root cause of so many of today's challenges. A lack of trust in government, the feeling that the people in power are never going to have your back. A lack of trust in another tribe. This tribalism that we see in America, it's very similar to the tribalism that you see in South Sudan. Lack of trust in your neighbor, lack of trust in the police, lack of trust in your lover. At all of these levels, we're seeing it every day. I spent most of my career as an advocate in US foreign policy, and there's this prevailing myth in Washington, D.C. that violence over there is somehow different than violence here at home. But my lived experience, and so many of the lived experiences of all of the peace builders that I work with all over the world, completely contradict that. There's nothing intrinsically different about the violence that we're seeing in America, about the gun violence that's tearing apart our communities, than the violence that we see in Afghanistan. And that's what's so helpful about looking at violence through the lens of trust. Because when you look at an issue through the lens of trust, you see how universal it is, and you see that, in order to tackle the challenges of today of violence, war, and division, we have to tackle it in a universal way. And this is why I'm a peacebuilding campaigner. Peacebuilders are a community of people all over the world who are working every single day to rebuild trust in societies, as we've already heard tonight. Peacebuilders fundamentally believe that all forms of violence are interconnected, and that if we're ever going to end the war in Afghanistan, we also have to address chronic violence here at home. And ultimately, peacebuilders believe that No one should have to suffer this constant level of violence that we're seeing today. Claudia said, one thing that Claudia said is that, when you look at the data of development here at the United Nations, for the New Yorkers in the room, that things are getting a lot better. Well, a lot of development indicators are getting better, but violence is getting worse. Right now, we're living in there's the highest level of violent conflict today in the world that there's been since the Cold War. We're at a 30-year peak of violent conflicts. There's 70.8 million people displaced around the world. 90% of them are fleeing violence and conflict. 1 in 6 people on the planet are directly affected by violence. And when I think about that number and remember how it felt for my community to be so devastated for so long by one killing, you think about the fact that we're almost at a 6 degrees of separation point with exposure to violence in the world right now. And that is not okay. And that is not something that we have to live with. So I'm here tonight representing Plus Peace, which is a brand new collective action campaign platform of peace-building organizations all around the world who are trying to build a new global movement for peace building. We're new, we just launched in September, and we're united around running new campaigns to try to build a more urgent, formidable, global movement to make the case for peace, to build peacebuilders' power, and to build a sense of urgency to tackle global violence and division the way that we see the urgency for climate change today. Through collective action organizing and opt-in campaigns, we are working to build a louder, more organized, and more formidable peace-building movement. And we'd love to talk to all of you today about that. So we're at peacebuilding.live, and I hope you will come ask me later about how to build a movement together. Thank you.